Welcome back and thanks for staying with us here on Today. Now, August is National Organ Donor Awareness Month. Around 5,000 people are on waiting lists, but on the number of potential donors continues to be a concern. Transplant Education for Living Legacies, or TAL, is on a mission to amp up the conversation on organ donation. Stella De Kock, who is on the waiting list for a kidney, has been on that list for about 11 years now. She joins us in studio to tell us about her journey and the awareness that needs to be raised. Stella, thank you very much for joining us in studio. Maybe let's start with what your life was like before you became ill.
So, I was born and raised in Pretoria. I went to school there. After school, went to do au pair work in Germany, came back and studied BCom. And, then I got married. My husband and I were traveling, were scuba diving. So just working normal life. So no indication of there was any illness or anything like that.
Yeah, and then what happened that led you to the point where you ended up being on the organ donor list?
So just before the age of 35, woke up one morning, my foot was painful, went to the GP, and I thought, it can't be that serious. I mean, my foot was painful. A few hours later, they phoned me and said, I've got 8% kidney function left, end-stage renal failure, I must please go to the ICU. And I thought, no, this can't be true. There must be a
Another
mistake.
reason, yeah.
Yeah, there must be a mistake with the blood test. I mean, I'm not feeling anything else. It's just my foot is painful. And went to the ICU, they did scans and blood tests, and then they confirmed the diagnosis of end-stage renal failure. So then I had to go on hemodialysis, which I've been on for the past 12 years. And a year after, I was waitlisted for a kidney.
Yeah. Tell us about that journey to be on a waiting list for as long as you have been, and why then it's become so important for you to raise awareness on organ donation.
So it's a difficult journey because each year you think maybe this year I'll get the call, because you can get the call from a deceased donor that the kidney is available anytime. And you do lose hope, if the kidney doesn't become available and you can't get a transplant. But then again, you can't just put your life on hold waiting, because otherwise I would have wasted the last 11 years.
Yeah.
So you do continue and focus on the things that you can still do while on dialysis and while on the waiting list.
Yeah, and so tell us about this awareness that you're trying to raise. What is it that you're trying to communicate to people when it comes to organ donation, and people like yourself who find themselves on waiting list for as long as they do? What is it that you are communicating in this awareness drive?
So TELL, the wordplay, is also tell your family, tell your friends that one day when you pass away, you would like to be an organ and tissue donor. It's very important that your family are aware of your wishes, because at the time of your death, the transplant coordinator will approach your family and ask for consent. So they have the last say of, if organ donation will be a possibility. So that is why it's so important, and TELL does education with the medical professionals to make sure that they refer potential donors, because if they don't refer, the process can't start. And then also for the families and the general public out there to have the conversation today, because it's a very traumatic experience if you find your family member brain dead in hospital. And if they don't know your wishes, the default would be no, because they don't want to make the decision on behalf of someone else. And then for the patients also, we do tell their stories, because not everyone wants to be on TV or do interviews. So on our website, we tell the stories of recipients, donor families, as well as living donors. And that is all just to make sure that people tell your family, tell your friends.
Yeah. Tell us why there are waiting lists as long as yours, where you are waiting for over a decade now for an organ. Is it a shortage? Is it the awareness that you speak about? What are some of the challenges there?
Yeah, so it's all of the above. So first is to be to be considered for an organ donor, you need to be brain dead in a hospital. So only 1% of all deaths do qualify, or are suitable to donate, your organs, but most people can donate their tissue. If you die of a heart attack here, you can still donate your tissue. Then the second thing is the referral from the healthcare professionals. A lot of them aren't aware, of the process, or they've got their own preconceived ideas where they would think the family has been through enough trauma, we're not going to, put them through more trauma. And that's not true. They do say that the family get a sense of almost relief that they know that the legacy of their loved one can live on. And you can save up to 8 people's lives with organ donation, improve the life of up to 50 people with tissue donation. Then the other thing is South Africa has got one of the highest rates of kidney failure. So the kidneys are the most transplanted organ. And South Africa's got a very high rate. And because I'm O positive,
it's even more difficult.
It's more difficult because a lot of people are O positive,
Yes.
so that's why the list is so long.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite unfortunate, and despite all of the negatives that are associated with this process, are there any positive stories of those who have received transplants and have been able to live their lives with the new organ that has been transplanted?
Yes, so the first one would be the South African transplant team. They went to Perth in Australia to participate in the World Transplant Games. And they ended up at 11, and they had 9 gold medals, 21 silver, and 9 bronze medals. So that is an achievement in itself. And they do like cycling, golf, darts, and athletics. And then specifically the 2 founding members of TEL. So it's Alice and Fawn, and then an activist. So Alice received a double lung transplant at the age of 23. She had cystic fibrosis, and that lungs lasted for 10 years. And then she had another transplant. She was lucky enough to survive. She's the first person to survive a second transplant, and it's now 5 years post her transplant. So she's working full time, she does CrossFit, and she's studying as well. So really a life, being lived. And she said before her transplant, her lungs sounded like plastic bags when she took a breath. And she was also on oxygen for 24 hours, 7 days a week. So she was homebound. Then there's Fawn. She celebrated her 10-year lung anniversary in March. And before she had her transplant, she spent over more than 700 days in hospital. She had a feeding tube, also on oxygen, and she was really ill. And after her transplant, she opened up her own company. She got married, and she's really living a life, for the better. So that is just 2 of the stories. But like I said, people can have a look at our website and read all the wonderful stories of people having a second chance at life.
Tell us a little bit about where people can register to become organ donors, and what would disqualify you as an organ donor apart from not being brain dead at the time of your passing or whatever it may be.
So at the time of death, the transplant team will assess the, your organs to see which ones are suitable for organ donation. So people mustn't disqualify themselves. For HIV, they transplant to HIV. You can have chronic conditions. It doesn't disqualify you. So they would look at, at the time of death, see which organs are still suitable. You can't, not too young, not too old, because a few years back they transplanted an 80-year-old's liver. So there's no age restriction. Most religions do support organ donation. So the most important part is for people to tell their families.
Yes.
So it's good to register, but it's not legally binding. So you need to have the conversation because your family will need to give consent.
Yeah, and then just a final thought from you. After you get a transplant, is it a permanent situation? You've just described 2 stories where one of the founders survived 10 years and then she needed another lung transplant. Is it possible to live with the same transplant for the rest of your life, or are you going to need a replacement at some stage?
It will depend, because you need to take immune suppressants, to prevent the organ from being rejected by your body. So some of the organs, they say normally 10 years, but it can be a lot longer. So we have stories of people having a transplant, you know, that lasted 30 years. So it really does depend on the organ and how your body reacts to it. But you are unfortunately on immune suppressants, but still, even though you are on that medication, it's still a better quality of life.
Yeah, and I was just about to wrap our discussion, but I have to ask you about the costs. Before you get the transplant and the constant medical attention, surely that's taxing on the pocket as well.
Yes, so the medical aid does cover your full transplant as well as your medication, and if you're a state patient, they will cover it as well. But for instance, a kidney transplant is about 100,000 Rand, where a lung transplant can be up to R1,000,000. Your medication on average 23 to 30,000 Rand. So it is quite, you know, a taxing, you know, expense.
Yeah, it is indeed, and we wish you the very best of luck, and thank you for joining us and raising the awareness this afternoon. That is Stella De Kock from the Transplant Education for Living Legacies, or TEL, if you will, encouraging all of us to go out and talk to our families about organ donation when the time comes, should we pass.